Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to our /EntitledPeople, where people think they can do what they want, when they want, and nobody else matters. And in today's episode, it's all about entitled roommates, guys. And OP tells a story about the time they had to live with this nightmare Karen, who just used them for free housing. And of course, OP teaches her a lesson she won't forget. Guys, I hope you enjoy the stories today. Don't shake your heads too hard. And as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Let's dive in. Okay, so this is a story about my roommate, a very peculiar guy. I've got a lot of stories to share about him. The first time he came to see the house, he shows up with his parents. They asked 1,000 questions about the house, and then they called the landlord to say they would rent an entire room with 2 beds, instead of just 1 bed in it. The guy didn't want to share a room with others, and he didn't want to rent a room with a single bed because he needs more space than the others. That was the moment I realized I was facing an entitled family. After renting the room, the father sat down on the sofa with a grunt, and the mother began washing everything the son could touch during his stay. At dinner time, we couldn't cook or eat because the lady had to scrub every bit of furniture chosen by the son to store his belongings. Also, she was scrubbing the shelf of the refrigerator that the son had chosen to occupy. Stuff like that. At a certain point, while I was in my room, I hear them calling me loudly. So I run to the kitchen, thinking of what could have happened. The son was behind his mother with folded arms, and she was vigorously rubbing the door of a piece of furniture. She then looked at me and she asked, "Do you eat cheese?" Now I thought about it for a moment, and I answered, "Well, it depends. I eat some types of cheeses." She then glanced at me again, this time with pity in her eyes. She then adds, "Well, my son doesn't like cheese, so you need to stop eating it." At this point, I'm thinking, okay. I wasn't sure how to respond, so I just tried to joke about it. And I said, "Well, that means I won't offer him any dairy products." I replied laughing, but they were serious. She then says again, "Do you really have to eat it?" I respond, "Eat what?" She says, "The cheese." Now, I was genuinely confused, and the son just kept staring at me. I just said, "Why? Is he allergic?" I asked that after a moment of reflection. It was very strange to talk about his son, who is more than 20 years old, as if he wasn't there. The mom just replies, "No, he thinks cheese sucks." I was just dumbfounded, so I respond, "I understand," without really understanding, but she didn't let it go. She just kept going on and said, "However, you can cook a lot of things without buying cheese. There's no need to eat it in this house anymore." At this point, it was starting to become a matter of principle for me. So I say, "I understand that, but it doesn't suck for me. In fact, there are some very good types of cheeses out there." Here, the boy just snorts, whereupon I turned to him because the situation was getting really ridiculous. I said, "Do you drink milk?" He says, "Yes." "And you eat yogurt?" I kept asking. "Yes," he continued. So the mother, suddenly satisfied, intrudes again, and she says, "Exactly. You can eat milk and yogurt in this house. He likes those." I just say, "But I'm the one who eats cheese, not him." I responded without really knowing what else to say, and she gets annoyed. She says, "Whoever eats it has nothing to do with it. At our house, cheese doesn't come in because otherwise he throws it away. He can't stand it, so you can't eat cheese anymore." I just say, "That's right, at your house. But 3 people live in this house, and if I choose not to eat cheese anymore, I certainly can't force the other boys to do the same." My reasoning didn't intimidate the lady, who tried to protest, but at that point, I simply just turned on my heels and left. Unfortunately, the matter doesn't end there. For months, we quarreled over the cheese problem, with the boy screaming every single time he saw cheese on our plates. And don't even get me started with cheese in the fridge or elsewhere. 2 years have passed, but he's still a huge pain in the ass. Okay, I'm really shocked that even after 2 years, OP still has to put up with that. Like the audacity of a person to come into someone else's home and start calling the shots. Yep, as long as I live here, you're not allowed to eat cheese anymore. Wild, right? Like if I were No Shoes, I would be eating cheese every frickin' day, and you could bet your butt that I'd be stocking the fridge with those giant cheese blocks you can buy at Costco. Like how ridiculous was that demand? And guys, if you think that was a head shaker, we're just getting started. So this happened to me about 10 years ago in a big city on the West Coast. I just finished grad school and I was looking for a way to cut down on rent in this expensive rental market. Now mind you, I was young, desperate, and inexperienced with roommates at the time. And this was a huge life lesson for me and hopefully for my roommate too. I placed an ad for a roommate on Craigslist, which in hindsight wasn't a smart move. Enter the bad roommate, who we'll call Karen, fake name. She was a few years older than me, and at first, she seemed really cool. She had a stable job as a licensed masseuse. So after interviewing her and hitting it off really well and getting to know each other for about a month, we rented a loft in downtown around October, with the agreement that rent and utilities would be split. Around the time the rent was due, Karen said that her work had been slow and she would pay rent in the next 2 weeks. Luckily, I had enough in savings, so I covered rent. Well, the 2 weeks came and went, and still no rent. When I asked her about the rent, she just yelled obscenities and she accused me of being abusive and harassing her. I'm not even kidding. And here's the thing. While claiming she didn't have money for rent, she would be out of the house from around 9 a.m. until around 2 a.m. visiting friends and buying random stuff. All of this nonsense continued on, as well as other things, such as stealing my food and breaking my belongings, including a bottle of wine that my recently deceased sister had gifted me. Her excuse was it was bad energy in the house, while giving me a little smirk. Fast forward to the beginning of December, and you guessed it, still no rent. This time, in addition to yelling obscenities, accusing me of being abusive, and breaking my stuff, she decides to call the police on me, accusing me of making threats and harassing her. The cops didn't do anything, as there was no evidence I did anything, and for the record, I didn't. But they did give me a lecture about making threats, and they said next time they come out, I would be arrested or forced to leave the residence. By this time, I was almost out of savings, and I was fearing eviction. Karen had not paid a single dime in rent since we moved in. The final straw came when I came home from work to find her threatening my 2 cats who were cowering in the corner. I almost lost it, but due to what happened before with police, I didn't want to poke the fire. This is when I remembered the officer saying that I could be forced to leave the residence, and that's when a light bulb went off in my head. I then called my best friend, whose father was an attorney, and after a phone consultation with him, he told me to pay up the rent and utilities through December, and then break the lease early. Simply surrender my key, the garage remote, etc., with a signed note saying that I surrender possession of the property with a specific date. I snapped a photo of this note and I left it with the secretary in the management office. I then proceed to sign a new lease with the last of my savings. 1 week before Christmas, while Karen's out visiting friends, I just packed up all of my belongings and left the house, pretty much empty, except for the little bit of belongings she had and a little bit of food and her bed. After about 2 days of angry voicemails, text, and missed calls from her, telling me what a horrible and irresponsible person I was to do this to her, boom, dead silence until April. In April, I was served with a summons for breach of contract for abandoning the lease by the landlord. I then contacted my best friend's dad and I filed a response to the court with a hearing date set in late May. I showed up to the hearing with my friend's dad and his 2 assistants. Karen was also there and she was looking smug. Think wine bottle incident smirk. The next thing I know, the other attorney announces that they're dismissing me from the lawsuit since I surrendered possession of the property, but they were not dismissing it against Karen. Hearing that, her face went white, the smirk disappeared, and it was priceless. After some back and forth, with her almost getting held in contempt of court for outbursts, the judge ruled against my roommate with full judgment awarded to the landlord. And the first cherry on top was my best friend's dad represented me pro bono. And the final cherry on top was I found out a month later in an angry voicemail from Karen that after being kicked out of a friend's house while couch surfing, her credit was trashed, she had an eviction on her record, and subsequently could not get another apartment, and that again, I was a horrible, irresponsible person to do that to her. I never heard from her again afterwards, but she was on the news a few months later for trashing a convenience store. The last I heard, she moved to Las Vegas. In the end, my credit did take a small hit. Even though the suit was dismissed, the debt was put into collections and reported to the credit bureau. It's a long story, but in the end, it was worth it to get back at an otherwise horrible person. Guys, I am so glad Karen got served and she got what she deserved, because she was a worst nightmare kind of roommate. And the nerve of her to make OP out to be the bad guy in this. Like, yeah, it is absolutely so irresponsible to pay rent on time and not break people's things. So a few years ago, when I was in my early 20s, I moved in with a friend who we'll call Bob. Bob was a bit of a heavy drinker and a partier, but mainly did so outside of the house, so it was really no inconvenience. It was me and my girlfriend also living there. I had lost my job, and I was out of work for a while in a very small town with not much to do for work. Bob worked 2 jobs because he loved money and alcohol so much, and my girlfriend worked in a nursing home during the day. Now, I felt pretty worthless since I was no longer the breadwinner anymore, but I did what I could do to help out. I got food stamps to take on the food situation, I cleaned, I cooked, I did whatever I could to help out. It was literally the least I could do given the circumstances. So about a month or 2 into the living arrangements, Bob suggested his old high school buddy, who we'll call Dick, move in. Bob explained that he worked on the boats, and he would be gone for a month at a time and be back for 2 weeks. Dry, rinse, and repeat. My girlfriend and I thought that should not be a problem, right? But wrong. From moment 1, day 1, Dick was a major aggressive a-hole. Bob walked him over to introduce us, and he shook my hand in a manner where he was obviously trying to crush my hand and intimidate me. I could tell from how he looked and acted that he was an entitled a-hole, but what he did and said immediately after confirmed it. He said to me, "So, you don't work and you live here rent-free. It must be why Bob asked me to move in. Sure is nice for you, huh? Doing absolutely nothing around here." Before I could say anything, Bob spoke up and clarified that while I didn't work, I kept the house clean, cooked, and kept the fridge stocked. I was not mooching, I was doing my part. Dick then proceeds to say, but his girlfriend works while he stays home all day. That's totally not cool. It should be you taking care of her, not the other way around. I don't like living with loser idiots. Now, while I totally agreed that I'd rather be there for her than the other way around, I didn't need this jackass commenting and making assumptions that this is what I wanted or needed to hear. So I say to him, look, I don't enjoy being the one who stays home while everybody else works. I'd rather be out there working, contributing, and doing something worthwhile. This is not something I chose. If someone called me and offered me a job right now, I would take it in a heartbeat. I'd prefer it if you stopped inferring that I'm a lazy bum, and I'm definitely not a loser idiot. I said that as politely as I could, despite how angry I was. Dick just looked at me like I grew a second head or something, and he told me to calm down, like he hadn't said anything that was the least bit insulting, even though he clearly had. The guy didn't apologize, of course, and he eventually met my girlfriend when she came home. Dick was very polite, and he proceeds to make passive passes at her. The guy would always say things like, "We need to find you a working man," or "You could use someone like me to treat you right. Leave him." My girlfriend was less than enthused by this, and she told him it was none of his business, and she was more than happy with me. So from the get-go, neither of us liked him at all. We resolved to keep as much space between him and us as possible. Now, unfortunately, Dick had about as much social awareness, social cues, personal boundaries, and proper etiquette as a rock. The guy would constantly come barging into our living area and even into our bedroom, even after being told to either knock or not come in at all. Also, the guy would turn the upstairs half of the house into a 2-week-long party central when he was home. It was loud, and between having over a dozen people all drunkenly stomping around and being loud, the guy was blaring music so loud the entire house was vibrating. His parties were also causing a huge mess in both the house and the yard, as well as damage. On top of that, Dick and his buddies were also cleaning out the cupboards and fridge of all the food for the rest of us, effectively leaving the rest of us with nothing and having to rebuy the food out of pocket. Bob was almost never home. He was either working or at a girlfriend's place. Even when he was home, he would come in so drunk that he would pass out so hard he didn't hear any of it. One day, my girlfriend and I sat down with Bob and we explained the situation to him. We explained that we tried talking to Dick and telling him that he needed to quit coming into our living area all the time and to either politely keep it down so my girlfriend can sleep for work or take it elsewhere. We also told him about the food, the major mess he was making, and the damage to the house, and Bob was livid. He told us that he would have a talk with Dick and to fix it. We hoped that would fix the issue, but again, we were wrong. And from there, it only got worse. The intrusions into our living area were more frequent, and the guy would start coming into our room in the middle of the night to wake us up. And the parties got even bigger and more out of hand. A couple of times, the neighbors actually called the cops on Dick's parties, and he still wouldn't calm down. It was a living hell. We now knew that the situation would never improve, and further complaints would only make it worse than before. So I began finding ways to get back at Dick silently, and without a way to try to link it to us. Firstly, he had to do his laundry downstairs, since that's where the washer and dryer were located, in our living area. So whenever he put his laundry into the dryer, I would stop it and pee in it before starting it up again. All of his clothes and bedding smelled like pee, and he couldn't figure out why, as Dick wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed. Secondly, whenever he was gone, I would go upstairs and I would dump out 75% of the alcohol out and replace it with water. This reduced how loud and rambunctious he would get, with the added bonus of having to go out and get more alcohol in the middle of the night. Effectively, we cut down the disruption by 50%, but it still persisted. Eventually, despite all this, it didn't rid us of either his presence or behavior, and it was still taking its toll on my girlfriend. This had continued for a few months before I concocted a way to get him out of the house even longer. Dick always left on the last Sunday of his 2 weeks off to return to the boats. He also had a big fancy truck with huge custom tires on it. These tires typically ran about $300 to $400 a tire, and they were special order tires, hard to find outside of ordering them online. So I started putting nails under a couple of tires before he left, so they would puncture his tires when he left, but they wouldn't go flat immediately. He would get to the boats fine, but his tires would be flat. Dick would then have to stay a week or even the whole 2 weeks special ordering or tracking down new tires while he was stuck in the town he was at in a hotel. My girlfriend and I would then just have 1 week of misery, or the whole thing being peace and quiet. It was glorious. This continued for about 2 to 3 months before Dick couldn't take all this misfortune anymore. He told Bob he was moving out when he got back, and that was because everything was going wrong since he moved in. This was especially funny to us because Bob told us afterwards that he was planning to ask Dick to move out because he was trashing the house, driving up the utilities, eating all the food, and refusing to pay the difference. Finally, on his last day, Dick comes bursting into our room, and he starts being rude, saying he was leaving because everything had been going wrong and felt off since he moved in, clearly wanting sympathy or something. We just nodded and we said that's tough, while going about our business. Dick just kept going on and on about everything, despite the fact that we weren't paying attention to him. You could clearly see that we didn't care about anything he had to say. Finally, we both got fed up and we just looked at him dead in the eye and we told him that he had been a terrible roommate, that had no respect for anyone, and that he deserved everything that was happening to him, plus some. The guy stormed off and we never saw him again. Bob did tell us that he was couch surfing since he moved out, and that nobody would let him stay with them because of his behavior. It was glorious, and it did bring a smirk to my face every time I heard it. I've long since moved out, and I lament to myself that maybe I was being too underhanded and vindictive. But this guy was toxic, and in all honesty, he got what he deserved. I just hope nobody else gets stuck rooming with this guy. You know, I guess sometimes you really gotta be petty with entitled roommates to really get the message across. Like, I can kinda see why OP did what they did, but at the same time, people argue that he went a little bit too extreme with the petty stuff. The pee and the tire thing. That said though, 2 weeks of that guy being home every month sounds like a complete nightmare, and I can't believe OP endured that for months. But guys, let me know if you think what OP did was justified, or if he crossed a line on this one. So this is the story of how I used Pavlovian conditioning to train my formerly obnoxious roommate to behave like a responsible adult. So the three of us are all nurses, and we live in this company-provided apartment. Each of us has his own room, which is joined by this common area that doubles as a kitchen and dining area. But the walls are paper thin, and they don't provide enough soundproofing. So if one were to say, have loud conversations in the common areas, it would resonate through all the rooms adjacent. But if you were in your own room talking to somebody, it wouldn't be heard outside. Basically, any sound you make in the common room could be heard in all the rooms. Now, this isn't a problem during the day, but at night, when everyone's asleep, our one obnoxious roommate always decides to have Facebook video calls in the common room, waking up everyone with his loud conversations. And since we're nurses, we have to work in shifts. Me and the second roommate work the 12-hour day shifts from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., while the third obnoxious one works the 12-hour night shifts, 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. So the third roommate tends to be awake at night. We get to sleep soundly when the third roommate has worked, but every time he doesn't have to go to work, the two of us tend to be disturbed by his late-night blabbering on his phone. We tried to handle it the adult way by talking to him about it and suggesting he do his antics inside his own room, since while in there, we wouldn't hear the loud conversations and he wouldn't wake us up at night, especially if we have to work in the morning. This did work for a while, but eventually he went back to his old habits of waking us up at night. We were getting so tired of the situation because all we wanted after a long 12-hour shift was to be able to sleep soundly, especially if we have to work the next day. Our hallelujah came from an episode of The Office that I watched, where Jim trained Dwight to crave a breath mint every time he restarted his computer. A light bulb suddenly switched on in my head to use our Wi-Fi to train my noisy roommate. Nobody else knew that I had admin privileges. I just happened to be there when the guys installed it, and they gave me the key. I realized that I had access to our Wi-Fi network on my phone, and I could turn it on and off on a whim like a god. Now, my MO was simple. Every time I get woken up by noisy roommate talking on his internet calls in the common room, I would wake up, turn off the Wi-Fi of the whole house, and then wait till he goes back to his room before turning it on again. The training took months and countless late nights. After getting woken up at night by said roommate, I would wait for an opportune time, usually when he's in deep conversation with someone, to turn off the Wi-Fi. I would then wait for him to get annoyed and curse the service provider until he finally gives up and goes to his room. Cue for me to turn it back on. The loud late-night calls in the common room became less and less until he no longer took them in the common room at all. This translated into silent nights for me and the second roommate who had to work in the mornings. My method was so effective that he actually thought there was a problem with his phone. Sometime later, he wanted to show me a video of something on his phone, but he said I had to come to his room for him to show me, since there was a problem with it. He told me the phone would not work in the common room. I was grinning like the devil the whole time. Oh man, brilliantly done by OP, and I'm so surprised at how effective it was. I just love the fact that the roommate was like, oh, but you gotta come to my room for me to show you this video. The internet doesn't work out here. Like, I'm just so impressed that OP spent months doing that, training his roommate. But hey, with some of those roommates, you gotta take drastic measures to get the message through, right? And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our /EntitledPeople. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed yesterday's episode on the channel, it's another r/EntitledPeople episode, where a guy actually sues OP for not going on a date with him. It's such a wild story, so go check it out if you haven't. And myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.